What? Okay, recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. My name is Thiago. I'm from Brazil. I'm living now in Berlin. I'm working for a company called Meter, where we develop what we're going to show to you today. And I'm here with my friend Israel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Israel, and I work with Thiago in Meter as well. It's nice to be with you here.
So today we're going to talk about full stack Django Rest Framework. Before I start talking about it, I want to give you a little bit of context, maybe disclaimer, why this solution was a fit for us. So first I want to talk a little bit about like how the team at Meter looks like. So we are a very small company with a very small team. And then we started to have some problems when we tried to separate backend and frontend. It was kind of hard because we want to have one big problem solved by a pair. So we always do pair programming. So we want that pair to be able to solve the whole problem without needing to have some other pairs working on the front end only or with the backend only. Then we had more backend developers than front end developers. I think that also helped moving things more close to the backend parts. And because most people was already used to Django Rest Framework, then they were used to Django itself, we started to think about maybe we can make Rest Framework work more in a full stack way than just to have JSON APIs. And we knew that Django Rest Framework had handlers, and we knew they had the HTML template handler. So that's why we decided to start using that.
Well, the progressive enhancement way is a concept that this concept appears a lot in our conversation, but not only in our conversation. We actually use this concept to decide on how we are going to do stuff and to solve problems. And I guess this is the overall frame we use to shape this talk as well. And I believe that the best metaphor to understand what progressive enhancement is to think about a seed and a tree and the relationship between them. And if you think that the seed doesn't look like a tree, but the seed actually has within itself all that it needs to solve the current problem and to do the next step, and not just about that. It's not just about the next step, but it's the next step in direction of becoming a tree. So talking about code, we use that to decide how we are going to solve the current problem, and still without carrying too much abstraction and solving too much upfront, but align it to the north where we want to arrive. So and why do like that? Because it's easy to stop, because we always have some problem solved. It's easy to stop in the middle of something because actually there's no middle, because we always have something ready to be deployed. And it's easy to change paths because we are not always risking the whole, because we are looking to solve a specific problem and a local problem. And it helps us to make sure that we are not solving a problem that it's already solved by some framework, some protocol, or some tool you use. For example, we are not re-implementing stuff that Django already does, and we are not re-implementing stuff that the browser already does itself. So it's nice to not worry about things that already works. So this is the background of what we are going to show. And one important disclaimer is we are not showing code that as a recommendation. This code is not, in spite of being ready to production, it actually is in production. It's a seed. It doesn't look like the final outcome. So we are going to see some ifs that probably is better to become, I don't know, a mixing, but we are not too worried about that. We are worried about the path, the whole path, and the process of making the next step easier and still being aligned to the final outcome. And with that in mind, we are going to talk about the API and render Django templates, add new renders, and at the end, enhancing some UI with JavaScript. And start with the API. What's the importance of that? When we are thinking about the API, it's not just about thinking about the usage of that. It's important, but first we need to think about the data that we are going to use. So the API gives us a useful tool that is more focused on the data itself. And we are not thinking about an abstraction of the data or the data we are going to have in the future. We are going to think about the data we have now and what we can do with the data we have now. And because of that, we start with the API, even if our first intention is to have a template, an HTML version of that. And not just because of that, but we realize that even when working with a HTML template, sometimes we went back and look at the JSON version of the data just to make sure that the contexts are well done and stuff. So it's important and useful to have a good fallback to simplify stuff and face the problem in a simpler way, and instead of always having to worry about the presentation of this data. And this looks like a waste of time, but it actually makes the process easier, even when we are not using an endpoint for that specific screen.
So then, after thinking about the data, thinking about the API, we start to think now about rendering Django templates. So when we first start this project and we start approaching this problem, we expected a little bit things like a little different, and we want to show you some of the things that we found out. And the first thing we saw was like, if you set HTML template renderer to your view, you may expect, okay, so now I can just do a template and it would just work. It doesn't really work like that. What happened is, by default, Django Rest Framework always return to the template the serializer.data, which means it is what it will become JSON format. So it's like very only simple data formats, simple data types. So for example, you don't have something like a date type. So for example, this doesn't quite work, because if you try to use that, they created at, we expect a date, but actually it will be a string, because that was what the serializer sent back. So the serializer data. So your context actually is not going to be exactly what you expect. So what we did was to create a dummy serializer. And this dummy serializer has only this. There's a self.data equals to data, and the data is the instance of the object on the database. We decided to do that, even though the documentation doesn't show us this is the way to do. So actually the documentation shows us that we should change our get function, and in the get function, instead of returning serialize.data, return the instance itself in a context with a dictionary, kind of like the way, if you're familiar with Django itself, the get context would do. But we decided to go with dummy serializer. So we decided to do that because we didn't want to change the get, because get is too far away in the process, in the pipeline of rendering something. So we wanted to do something in the middle, because we thought that, well, other things may use the get differently. We don't want to change too much, so we want to have change only when we need it. So we decided to change actually the get serializer class, and then when it's HTML, we return a dummy serializer. With that, everything works. So now we have our data as we expect in the template, so we don't lose the Python convenience. So after doing that, everything works well. Then we started to have new problems because then we started to have forms, and handling forms was a very nice surprise. So here I'm showing you like one of our custom forms that we overrode from the Rest Framework virtual input. So you can take a look with more depth in the documentation itself. But what I want to show to you, just so you understand a little bit how it works, Has Framework has a form handler that actually don't really use in your view, but actually it's just a template tag which has a render form that you receive a serializer, and this will just work. That's very nice, because what it does, it goes into the serializer, and each of the fields of the serializer, it looks up a HTML that will render that field. In this case, we have an input. So this is the most basic one. We thought it was really cool when we saw that pattern across Has Framework multiple times, where you have the HTML and CSS very, not strictly, but very well separated from the rest. So that's really nice. So if you have a designer or someone who's more into HTML, CSS, not too much into Python, you still have the power of HTML right there for you. You can set your classes, you can have your context. You don't have to have to worry too much about like Python and how, for example, we in the form itself from Django, sometimes you can set the classes in Python. So you can also do that directly here. So that's really nice. Actually, you have this vertical input. This virtual is like a template pack. You can have multiple of them. So we have vertical, horizontal. You can download a material version of that. So I think that's something really nice. We didn't expect that. We were very new to the concept like a Has framework being full stack, and that was really nice concept that we found there. So that's really easy to change, really easy to customize, and we totally recommend following the path. So,
well, it's not always a good surprise. And when we are creating some app, there are some parts of it that repeats. And in our case, we want that these parts, for example, pagination and filter sometimes, and stuff like that, can be different according to the different view of the data. For example, when we are creating HTML, we want to be able to choose the pagination strategy we want for our case. And that was our first approach, which is the very same approach that the documentation recommends us, to overwrite the pagination class and change it according your decision as designing application. But sometimes we have the API, and we started by the API actually, and when using a JSON view, we want to be able to choose a different approach about pagination, and following that path of not adding too much abstraction, we went for approach that, well, if we are just changing according the format, that's what we are going to do. So we tested if it's HTML format, choose the correct pagination strategy. And using this simple solution, we can choose and add a new pagination strategy as we want.
another thing that we discovered that was not as we expected, actually, only was in Django. At least I've been using Django for a long time, and every time I just put a login required to a view, I just know it's going to redirect to the correct place. So, like if the user are not allowed there, you're going to be redirected to the login page. Everything is going to work fine. You have the next set up, so everything is there. When you're working with Has framework, it's not true anymore, and it makes sense that not to be true anymore, because you're mostly working with API. So you actually want to do is like return different HTTP status. So fortunately for us, Rest framework created this this way of changing how you deal with, how you handle actually exceptions. So we create our exception handler. You can set that in your view. You just say like there is like a get exception handler, and you just say which view, which function do you want. And the only thing we did was we checked if there's like HTML, and then we return the redirect to login. And this is from Django itself. So that was actually took a while to figure out, but in the end it looks quite small and works really well. But that was something we were not expecting at all. And it took a while to think what is the best approach, how to do with that. We are very happy with this one. So if you're going to do something like we're doing, be aware, and maybe this is a good way to go. Then I want to talk about renderers. So far we talk about the HTML renderer, but now I want to talk about different renderers. So we had a problem at Meta once that was like we needed to create a lot of new features for a data table. People wanted filters, people wanted search, the pagination itself that we already showed, a lot of things. And they wanted all of this because they wanted to explore the data. And then we thought like, well, actually, why don't we give them like an Excel file? And we knew that we already had renderers and this whole thing. So adding a new renderer should be easy enough. And it really was easy enough. By just adding a new renderer, now our view could send back the same data, but now rendered as XML, not XML, XLSX, and not HTML. And that was super nice because we could give this new feature really quick. So I want to show you a little bit how it looks like. So if you want to do your own renderer, because we, of course, like we're doing XLSX, you can do your own and what fits you better. I recommend you going to the third-party packages in the guide of the Django Rest Framework. There's a link for a lot of them, and you can see code. It's all open source, so it's really nice to learn from them. But basically, you need really simple things. It's just like a render function. We have some data coming in, and you have to return it, do something. You need also to have just two things, two attributes in your class, just the media type for the content type, and also the format for when you requesting data. So you can do something like / your URL, and then has a format in the get parameters, and it can be in this case txt. So that was quite easy to change if we need to, and also if you want to explore and to enhance like the way we've been doing so far. So I think it's nice to know how render works. And then we also have something different, like remember like when we talk about dummy serializer that we thought, like, let's change this get serializer class. That was a really good starting point, because then this became very important. Because now our XLSX needs a serializer that is different than the HTML, of course, because the HTML is a dummy serializer. Later, the JSON is going to be another serializer, maybe not. That depends on you. But that was important for us, like having a way to define which serializer to use was really good. And we always using this is HTML format, is XLS format. I want to give you like a quick look into how we did that. So basically you have in Rest Framework, it adds the accepted renderer for you all the time. And you can just check what is the accepted renderer, and you can check if it's the one you're using, and then you can define what to do. That was very, very helpful. And then we use this multiple times. For example, pagination. So pagination, for example, I don't want to have pagination in XLSX. That makes no sense. How can you paginate like an Excel file? So by just having this, if it's easy, I can do it. Otherwise, I just paginate carousel like normally, and then it will just work, and that's fine. So that was very cool, easy to do, and we can do more renderers if we want. And it was super, was a feature that was very fast to implement. We didn't have to think too much. We already knew the data. We already knew what the data was talking about. So starting this was really cool. We didn't have to waste too much time thinking about a new endpoint, a new API, how we're going to do, how it's going to look like. Everything was already there. So we had a lot of thoughts already done in that field, in that problem. So that was really cool. A thing that that emerged from this decision of a full stack HES framework. So next.
Yeah, and different from the thing we have saw until now, this part is not in production because all we did without JavaScript was fast enough and the user experience was good enough. So this part we are not deployed yet, but we did this example just to explore around and see, check about what is the limit of that? How can we use JavaScript to improve what we already have? So we first are making sure that we are just checking the version without JavaScript and see its work fine enough. And what we're going to do is to acknowledge some error in a list of errors, and we're going to click in this acknowledge button, and you can see the refresh it's happening, the normal one, the traditional one actually. And what we are going to try next is to enable JavaScript and see how can we improve that by avoiding this additional general request or big request. I mean, so when you click now, there's just a Ajax request, and we can see the body of the response, and we have the JSON that we can use to update our HTML in order to enable the click again. And the data we send, it's the same we are going to send when we are using the HTML approach, is a form data. So we are using the same approach to send the data, and taking the response to update using the response to update the HTML. And you can see that it's a old school HTML form, that there's no fancy framework or complicated stuff. It's just as complicated as it can be, and as simpler as it can be. And we don't even need this explicit value checking because Django forms can take care of that, but we are doing this way to show explicitly what's happening. And we are adding this value and trust that the browser itself and the HTML, we are going to do the heavy lifting for us. And the JavaScript, we chose to go for a vanilla approach without any framework, just to show what's really happening behind of the scenes. And what we're doing right now is overriding the submit event and getting the answer and using the answer of the request, the response of the request, to update the value of the input. So this way we can click once and update the data and click again, and we will have the same behavior but changing the data in the backend. And a tricky part of that is, since we are using the very same view to taking care of these two behaviors, the behavior that uses Ajax and the behavior that uses normal or old school requests, we had to override this behavior because the expected behavior when we are updating the data with a JSON endpoint is to see the detail after the update happens. But that's not the behavior we intended to our template, to our HTML version of interacting with the data. Because after we update the data, we want to see again the data table we used to change the data. So we are adding this redirect, and we try to be as precise as possible to use what we already have. So we have already this behavior, this header available in the HTML specification. So let's use them. And we use that to redirect back and preserve this behavior we want.
So in conclusion, we want to give you a little bit of like what happened, what we wanted really for you to take home and use in your own projects. So just reminding you all like what we have talked so far. So I think for us, like the biggest learns we had was like finding a solution that really fitted us. So we experienced with other solutions before, didn't quite work, maybe for a bigger team or a different team that could have been better. But finding one that really fitted us was really good. Another thing we learned a lot was this balance of just changing where and what you need. So we didn't have to rewrite our own framework, write everything the one way we wanted and have everything done again, but also at the same time, we didn't have to just change our own problems to fit in the framework that already existed. So we liked a lot this possibility to change just where we need, changing just like, for example, the get serializer classes, adding a few ifs some places, doing a lot of inheritance, and maybe everything worked as fast as we thought, and that was really cool. And also, of course, a progressive enhancement that was essential for us to go through, that helped a lot to us deciding like what is the path that we wanted to go through, and always have this in mind when we want to build something that should give value right away, so we can do something, stop, then make it better later. So that was very good for us as well.
Yeah, it's important for us to highlight that the solution we have probably will not look like the solution you want to your case, but this process of thinking about the whole problem, including the team we have, including the technology we have on hand, and taking it into consideration together, because sometimes we forget that when we choose some technology, we are actually choosing some stuff about our teams as well. So, and when we choose a team, we are choosing technology as well. And thinking about this whole thing together and progressively, and trying to be precise in each step of the problem solving process, it's I guess it's the main takeaway of this whole process for us. So I hope this will be useful to you as well.
So thank you everyone for staying together with us today. We're gonna go for the questions. We still have our contacts over here. So thank you one more time.
Thank you.
Didn't got it. We are we expecting? Are we waiting for a moderation?
No.
No.
I don't think there is one.
No.
Recording is on.
It's free for all. Anyone can ask us questions if you want to.
Hey.
Hi.
So your use cases are mostly crude, right? Like just listing and details. Like, did you have any page or interaction that needed more complex behaviors, and like did that get in your way for some reason, or you only have like really simple crude views?
Not in this project. In this project, we have just simple crudes, but we have already used this approach to build, for example, some charts and some D3.js stuff. So you can have some heavily interactively page with the very same approach, but adding an additional layer of JavaScript maybe. Are you seeing my screen? Not yet?
No.
Okay. What about now?
We see your both screens. Yeah.
And the fix that, but if you look at here, there is some shorts, and there's no data, sorry. But this is a tree view. Let me try to get a year with some data. And what you did here is exactly the same. When we change we two events script, we change it the on change event to do a submit, and we override the submit with update data. So here we added some JavaScript. Actually, for structure, I guess there's no JavaScript at all. It's just CSS. But for others like this one here, we have the 3JS, but it's the very same approach. It's the very same approach. What changes is that function that we showed at the end of the talk that handled the response. So we can put something fancy, but it is not our use case in this talk.
Hello. Very interesting approach. It's quite special to see this, how you manage to kind of use a REST framework to do traditional HTML responses. So I got lost a bit into the details during the presentation. So I just wanted to know if you had like an example code that we could inspect to clearly understand how you handle this, let's say like dual API.
Okay, I thought that you were going to answer. So yeah, no, we do not have. We tried to build something for DjangoCon. We didn't have the time because we wanted to do like a nice project that we can put on GitHub. Maybe that's something we can think about now that we don't have the pressure, the time pressure anymore. So maybe that's something we can do. We can think about and have like a simple view that deals with like this different handlers, and you can see the code and play around and use as example. Yeah, that's something we can do. For start, I think going with the has framework documentation is really good. I think the main difference is what we shown. It was the dummy serializer. So instead of using like changing your get request or post, change only the serializer class. That was something that it's a little bit different than the documentation. But yeah, we can think about that. That's something we wanted to do anyway. So if we do that, we can post. I think this Slack is going to continue for a while. I think it have the same from last year. I'm not sure. Maybe we can post it, or I can tweet.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sure.
But one thing, sorry, please go ahead.
No, it's fine. That's it. Thank you.
One thing I felt during the process is if you just change the order, if you commit to add the JavaScript at the end of the process, so things are flows kind of naturally this way we did, because there is already some solutions to traditional problems, and the Rest Framework documentation was pretty helpful in this whole process. So it's, despite of not having a good example to show you, a ready example, I guess just following this commitment and the Django Rest Framework documentation can provide a very cool traveling, I guess.
So this dummy serializer you presented got me thinking about there's a strategy I like to use in Django projects that have like more complex domains, is to create domain objects. So just plain Python classes detached from model instances, because sometimes you need data from different models they're related, but you don't necessarily want all of the fields, and you want to apply some business logic, so you can like create your just a class, create a bunch of properties, and like do whatever business logic you need to do in that class, and like really encapsulate the business logic in a single place. So that dummy serializer got me thinking about that. It would be really interesting to have an architecture where I can give, so just use this my domain objects and pass them as context to the view, to my template, at the same time that I can use these objects to pass to a serializer, and yeah, send the same data to the API.
Yeah, it's pretty helpful, and actually it's pretty annoying not having this possibility, not having our own methods in the view, because if we don't do that dummy serializer, we are going to handle with integers and strings, and that's all. Not even date we are going to have. So if you have a richer object with a lot of properties and cool methods, and not having the possibility to use that in your template, it's pretty annoying. So
yeah,
that was the magic behind the dummy serializer, I guess.
There was a question from James. He said, hello, I think this is really cool. What are the ways that you try to solve this? Given that you probably came up with more than one previous solution to your problem, how did you know that the current solution is the most correct one? So that's nice. I don't think we even know that this is the most correct one. We had, of course, before that, using only Django. And then we had sometimes problems when we needed to do this more interactive things through JavaScript. Then we kind of like had always to create another view. There's an API. We have always this separation we didn't like too much. We've tried using like a single page application approach. Then that was the worst case scenario for us because of the way our team works. And then we arrive at this one. What we've been liking so far is what we told in the presentation, in the talk, was that was pretty nice to be able to change just little small parts and keep the rest the way they were. And for now, that's what the thing we are liking the most. So it's easy to find the just small part during the request response process, change what we need to change and keep the rest. So our experience have been that from time to time, we took a while to build the whole thing, the base, but then we need to add new features when somebody have like a new feature request, like the example we gave with the XLSX. It was super easy to implement. Or when we need to do like this Ajax things, also it was very straightforward to implement. I wouldn't say easy, but very straightforward. We already had everything in place. And we've been like this because of that so far. That's what we liked, and got people also. Also, another thing I think it's nice in our team, we had way more people that knew Django Rest Framework, that they really knew Django, because I think nowadays that's very common. A lot of people work a lot in backend exclusive application. So I think that also was a way to get people in the front end without the feeling too much. So when you see your front end, surprise, it was easy. It was nice. It was nice to give people, so they already knew the concept. So that was cool. Instead of having to, because I think Rest Framework looks a lot like the Django views, but they're not quite the same. And I think a lot of things you think they're the same, they're not. So I think it also was nice for us to keep in mind just one thing, one mindset. So this is Django Rest Framework. I know what to override, and that was why we stick to this for now.
Yeah, and about your last words, the most correct one. This raises a very philosophical subject, and we like it a lot. But what do you think about it? Is it's kind of not obvious that when you go for a solution that adds another layer of abstraction, we are actually making things more complex. It looks obvious, but it's not. And if you add, for example, a JavaScript framework, for example, Angular, that solves a lot of problems to you, it brings with it a lot of complexity and a lot of weight, because you need to learn that new language, language above JavaScript and above HTTP protocol and the way the browser works. So while we are creating a web app, we have a right to learn the HTTP and HTML and the browser before the browser's default behavior. So we have to learn that anyway. If you add a new layer of abstraction, we are adding a new level of complexity. And I can't talk hearing the current presentation. Let me pause here just a minute. I'm sorry. I'm lost in my tabs right now. I'm sorry. I can't talk.
While you doing that, so just let me answer another question. So how to get a copy of the presentation? I don't know. I think everything is going to be available on Loudswarm for a while. I don't know if they are going to post it also later. Maybe that's it's a question that maybe we can ask in the support channel, because I think that's better to get from them. If you want, you can ping me on Slack directly. That's the same name, so Thiago Garcia. I can also send you the copy of the slides. So it's just a Google Docs. But if you want the presentation itself, like the recording, I think you have to ask the support channel so they can direct you to there.
I'm sorry, because my confusion. I was hearing some noise here. I couldn't think. So what I was trying to say is that it's not obvious that we are in complexity, and what we believe that's most correct about that is because it's simpler, and sometimes it's harder because we need to figure out how to replicate some behavior that these frameworks already does for us. So it's harder. We need to understand deeper the behavior of the browser and the behavior of HTTP and Django Rest Framework and Django. We need to handle with the whole stack, but we are not adding a new one that it's trying to hide this complexity by adding another layer of complexity. So it's tricky, but we believe that it's most correct because it's simpler. But it's not the most correct for all the contexts. Sometimes we need just to deliver a fast feature that it's built in these frameworks, in the Angular framework, and sometimes it's better just to deliver that and then try to follow a progressive enhancement approach. We kind of call it the balance between graceful degradation, which is when you deliver stuff and it's just worried about getting things done fast, and then we go back and do the progressive enhancement into having this very same feature but in a more robust way. Let me just add something. It's important to consider your team in that decision heavily. I guess this is one of the biggest learns of this whole process. Because if your team are composed by people that handle very well or learn or already knows Angular, for example, that's what you have. So go for Angular. And we try to face the whole problem considering these aspects that we sometimes ignore. the current knowledge we already have. So it's important to consider that as well.
The other talk has started, so I'll see you around.
See you. Bye-bye.
See you around. Thank you, guys. Ciao.